Hey everybody, this is Caleb, okay? So Caleb is usually behind the camera, not in front of the camera. And he actually puts more work into these table talks than I do because he's here the entire time. He sets up the cameras, he's here before me, and then he edits everything afterwards. He uploads them to YouTube and all of that. But Caleb is more than somebody who is just technical and great and adds so much to our ability to reach people and help people. Caleb is a really awesome guy. We have had some amazing conversations through the years, and I just really love having him as a friend. So I'm really excited for you to meet Caleb, who's always here. You just never knew it. So Caleb, what's up, man?
What's up?
Welcome. Finally.
Yeah.
We get to chit chat. I mean, you've been on one of these before.
I think that it was a group panel discussion. But just just the two of us.
And a lot of people were like, hey, that Caleb guy, he has a lot of good things to say.
I don't know. I'd like to think, in general, I like to listen more than I talk. I don't always do the best job of that. Depends on the scenario. This is obviously more of a talking situation. But yeah, no, in general, I think I prefer to sit more in the background.
Yeah.
And not try and be too loud because, it's easy for me to be overconfident. I've learned that. And yeah, sometimes it's good to sit back and
What do you mean overconfident? Tell me more.
Part of it is a pride thing. Like, I know it's easy for me to be too prideful and know I'm good at certain things and be too confident because of that.
Yeah. You're good at a lot, for sure.
And there's genuinely some danger in that and not recognizing where hey, I'm overstepping myself and then looking back and realizing, oh, I just put my foot in my mouth big time there.
Sure.
So yeah, just because I think it's something I'm very cognizant of because I've realized I've done that I try to be aware and just not. There are certain areas that are definitely my swim lane. Like if it's tech stuff, I've been doing tech stuff my whole life, and I'm pretty confident in that.
Sure.
But then in other areas, I've learned it's a lot better to just listen, and there's so much more I've learned by listening. Yeah. Instead of just trying to jump in there and say stuff.
Does the prideful person know he's prideful?
It depends. In my case, yes. I think thankfully in part just because of how I was raised. Okay. I remember
But isn't that humility being able to be taught? And
that's yes and no.
So it's pride going on.
I think you can have both at the same time. I think you can have struggle with pride and also actively work to be humble at the same time.
See what I'm saying? See what I'm saying? This is great. This is what we do.
So funny story of the pride humility thing that I think encapsulates me way too well as far as how I struggle with both those dynamics.
Okay.
So freshman year of high school, I was going to a Christian high school. And it was high school only. So it was pulling from a bunch of different Christian middle schools and other schools around the area. Freshman Bible class. I was, to be blunt, a little bit prideful.
Did you have a beard?
No, at that point I didn't.
When did the beard come in?
Somewhere, I don't know, probably sophomore year or something like that.
Okay, sophomore year, get out of here. Anyways, keep going.
Actually, it was really weird. For a long time, I did a beard with no mustache. That was not a good look.
Oh, that's hilarious. I want to see that. Chops.
So, I was slightly prideful in this Bible class because at the school, they went through all the books of the Bible 3 or 4 years. And specifically that year, we were doing, Luke, Acts, I think 1st and 2nd Corinthians, and Hebrews and James. And at that point, and some other books. But at that point, those were all books I had memorized already.
You memorized the books?
I did something called Bible quizzing growing up. So,
okay.
At that point, I basically memorized all those and also went to a Christian school. So, anyway, I was, back to the pride humility thing. I was a little bit overconfident in this class because of that. I knew the material pretty well.
Yeah.
One day, the teacher opens up the class with this comment or question of, what is humility? Say you're in a dark alley somewhere and a masked robber, whatever, comes up to you, points a gun at your head and says, what is humility? And for context, I always sat in the front row, but not front and center. I sat off to the side up against the wall. And so he asked this question. I was literally just sitting back, arms folded, because I really quickly figured out what a good answer was. And he's asking all these other kids. And they're thinking less of yourself. And he's no, bang, you're dead. And then another kid answers and is putting others first. And it's like, no, bang, you're dead.
You can tell this is a private Christian school.
Yes. Oh, yeah,
you do that in a public school. Yikes.
Yeah. But it was getting the point across. And
For sure.
The most hilarious part about this whole thing is some other kid pointed me out because I was clearly like, just like sure of myself. And like, so like, okay, Caleb, what is it? Like, what do you think it is? And like the answer he was looking for was, you have the gun, I don't. And the point in relation to humility is that's who we are in relationship to God. It's what's the bigger picture perspective of understanding what's actually going on. That's what humility is.
Okay.
It's not putting yourself down. It's not making everybody else better.
Yeah.
It is saying, what is the big picture here?
Yeah.
Like God is in control. God's, over everything, and having that perspective. And again, it's seeing things from God's perspective and not, again, debasing yourself for something else. But the irony in that story, of course, is my pride and being like, well, I've got it all figured out.
Yeah.
And know what you want. And like, honestly, that's sort of a good way to capture it and like that tension I feel sometimes, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well,
Well, I view you as a confident in thought individual because you put a lot in as well. You really think things through. And I really respect that about you. So, and it's nice, but we can kind of steer the ship as we talk and say, oh yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think prideful person sometimes, I think you err a little bit more on the side of humility. That's not err, but you're more on the side of humility just because the conversation's fluid. It's not my way or the highway,
Yeah. No, I think I've learned from
Open
that.
to reason.
Yeah, I think that my way or the highway thing is something I've learned from and like seen happen and been like, no, I want to learn from that and not do that.
Okay. So I'm going to ask you a zinger here. Okay. So having a struggle then with pride was obedience to God difficult for you? Like strong-willed child? Like, is that?
Yes and no. So I grew up in the church.
Okay.
I think I mentioned like private Christian school from like first grade on. I was in the church all the time. I was like going to youth grade group from 7th grade on. I did Bible quizzing. So like I was in church, like volunteering from 7 a.m. to like 12 p.m., like early services to like the later service. And then coming back for youth group at like 3 p.m. until like 8 or 9 p.m. on Sundays. And then like back in.
Yeah.
I was in the church all the time. And like, I would honestly say I don't really ever remember getting in trouble as a kid.
Yeah.
But for me, your question there of like obedience to God and like being strong-willed, for me, it was more of, and it still is, a question of, am I really giving God everything, if that makes sense? Mm-hmm. Of like, oh, it's easy enough to sort of just walk this walk and like follow all the rules because that's what the easy thing to do is. But am I like truly sold out for God? And that, thankfully, has been something that God has hit me with again and again.
Yeah.
So yeah, I wouldn't say I was like strong-willed and like wanting to run away or do it my way. In a way, it's almost worse because like that's easy to see, if that makes sense. Of like, hey, I'm like clearly fighting against God versus something that's more been like, I just want to do things like, it's not like clearly wrong. It's not clearly like my way versus God's way. And like, I think God has space for that to be clear. I think God absolutely can work with lots of different options. But for me, it's been more of being like, I've been convicted more than once about like, okay, you say Jesus is Lord and is King of your life. Does your life actually look like that?
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I think that's sort of more of what it's been for me of this question of, am I really truly putting God first in my life? I say these things. I'd say he's the Lord of my life. Is that reflected in how I spend my time in my quiet time and just my day to day? And nowadays it's in my PTO. Like, am I actually spending like my time off and my money and things like that? Is that putting God first? And that's something, I've been very much challenged by.
Yeah. Yeah. But you're thinking it through and you're open to reason.
Yeah. I like to think that.
So you grew up in the church, but like, when did you come to faith?
Yeah, that's an interesting question.
Was it along the way?
I would say it's along the way. I don't have a super distinct. In my life, it's been a lot of like vignettes, if you will, of like specific situations where I was really on fire for God. I remember like my 6th grade year. This would have been 2006 then. There was this skit to the Life Songs, not Life Song.
Everything.
Everything, yeah.
Yeah. It's so funny. As soon as you said the skit, that's what popped
that
into my
time
head.
frame.
That's
Yep.
what popped into my head.
So
What year was that?
I think it was 2006,
2006, yeah.
2007, somewhere in
Oh
there.
yeah, we did that skit at college ministry that I ran, and I remember an atheist, a very intelligent atheist. He was very antagonistic to faith. He came to Christ like on the spot, and then I got to disciple him for a long time after that. It was really cool, Kevin.
Yeah.
He's a great guy.
So yeah, my middle school, like they did that
It's powerful.
skit in chapel, and it is. If anyone wants to look it up, the correct is Everything by Lighthouse.
Lighthouse, light. Yeah,
Who
I'll
is
look
it?
it up. Oh
Okay,
wait, I don't
anyway,
even have it on me. Yeah,
Anyway, the song is
you just
Everything.
do everything Jesus.
Lifehouse,
skit.
that's
yeah,
it, yeah.
Lifehouse. That's it. Yeah.
I remember so that was in conjunction. I think I was reading a book, This Present Darkness by Frank Peretti,
Okay.
which is like this book about spiritual warfare. It's a really cool. It's fiction, but it's about spiritual warfare.
Amy Schaefer just told me about that book 2 days ago.
Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was a really fascinating read.
Is it a trilogy?
I
by
believe
any
it's a
chance?
trilogy.
Okay.
This Present Darkness, Piercing the Darkness, and I forget. Anyway,
Yeah. She was just telling me about it.
yeah, I was reading those, and so it's just this like very real, like in my head. Oh, spiritual warfare. Like this is what it looks like for demons, to be trying to meddle in our reality.
I could see that. Yeah.
In conjunction with the skit. And I remember like sort of just all that hitting at once. And like there's just this point where like sixth grade me was like not just like sort of on fire for God. It was just one of those like there were like a couple of days of me just like walking around the halls of my school, and that whole like praying unceasingly thing was easy. Like literally every single moment of every single day, just being like, hey, I can pray constantly.
Yeah.
And like that was just like such this powerful moment of like, hey, God, you're real. And yeah, I guess I've had different like things of that. There was another like summer youth camp. I think it was my sophomore year. I was very strongly convicted about am I putting technology before God? And like ended up doing like a 40-day fast after that youth camp of being like, I'm not doing anything related to computers, which or technology, which for me was and still is sort of a big thing. Like to the point of like, yeah, I'm not even gonna like wear a watch.
Wow.
And just like giving all that up and just being very convicted about things like that. And so, yeah, God's used sort of, yeah, I've grown up in church. I don't even really have a very distinct, hey, this is when I became a Christian. Like I can think of like 2 or 3 different, like, in my head, the classic Sunday school teacher or whatever else, like asking little kids, like, do you want to give your life to Jesus? And doing that, a couple of different times, right?
Right.
But like for the moments that have really mattered and changed my life, it's been more of those where like God's just made himself really real in an undeniable way to me. And yeah, and some of it's just been more of me responding than God showing up in a powerful way. And that's almost been like just as impactful, like the fasting, or even my decision to move here to Pittsburgh. So that was another thing where well, okay, God definitely opened some doors and made things really clear. But it wasn't that like, oh, God showed up and it was a like, lights shining down, everything changed, something like that. It was more of like me taking action on what God was doing and that making a huge difference. So like the short-ish version of the story is I grew up going to a church in Mooresville, Indiana, a suburb of Indianapolis. And there was a youth camp we went to every year called CDYC. And after I actually graduated from high school, I still kept going back. I was a volunteer with my youth group. I had like a group of 7th grade guys, guys I had been with since they were 7th graders and like up through high school. And this would have been 2017. At this point, I was still living at home. I was working a job at a like mom and pop computer repair shop. I was like an assistant manager or something, yay. But honestly, not really going anywhere. I'd done a year of college, but dropped out afterwards just because I was not invested, to be blunt. I was like not excited about it. So I was at this point where honestly, nothing I was doing was bad, if you will, but I wasn't going anywhere, if that makes sense. Yeah. I was just sort of spinning in place and didn't have a direction or somewhere I was going. And at CDYC 2017, one of my good friends, Chris Schilling, was there, and we were chatting and actually about some of this stuff. And that same CDYC, one of the youth pastors, and my friend Chris Schilling volunteered with this youth pastor, Brian Henry, announced that he was going to plant a church in Pittsburgh. And so like some of those discussions and stuff were happening. And then,
How long was this before Brian planted the church?
so this was 2017. So this was like the fall. So
Did
this
he
was
do
the
2019?
summer. Yeah, so Brian
Maybe
moved
Easter
in the fall
2019?
of 2017 to
Okay.
Pittsburgh.
Okay.
And then we actually launched in the fall of 2018
Okay.
for Treeline.
Okay. So that means we were in 2017. Excuse me.
Yeah, 2017.
I was yawning there. It's not because of your story. It's because I have 2 kids. One wakes us up in the middle of the night and one wakes us up early in the morning.
Perfect.
5 kids, you know that, but 2 of them are
Yeah.
still waking up. So anyways, so
yeah.
Okay,
fall of 2017.
then we started Hill City 2017 then, and then Brian started Treeline 2018. Okay,
Yeah.
that makes sense.
Yep. Basically, so Chris and I had some of those conversations. I had known about like Brian launching Treeline, but like hadn't thought too much of it.
Yeah.
And then like a month or 2 later, this was like, I think August, Chris hits me up out of the blue. He's like, hey, are you interested in moving to Pittsburgh to help with this church plant? I was like, no. It wasn't like a completely no. It's just like, wait, what? Why are you?
Yeah, it
like,
seemed like so out of the blue.
asking me this. And so I was like, sure, whatever. I'll have a conversation with Brian, and you, and just like see what's. So like, yeah, met Brian for coffee on like a random Friday afternoon. I just chatted with Chris and
How'd
him
that conversation
about
go?
it. It went well because so at this point I like knew of Brian, but I'd never
Yeah.
really had a sit down conversation with him.
Yeah.
Just because like hadn't really had a reason for it or whatever else.
Was he different in person than he was as a communicator, as a youth pastor? I feel
No.
like he's always been the same.
Yeah, no, he's been very, very similar. Actually, I think
He talks a lot faster when he speaks.
Yeah.
And he jokes a lot more whenever it's one-on-one. But that might be about it.
I was gonna say it depends on what
The
his
audience.
is.
Yeah. Sure.
He definitely lets loose a little bit more when it's the like youth group audience.
Yeah. And they come too. Like his mind is a Ferrari. Jokes just keep on coming.
Yeah, it's really funny. Like it's great when he lets the leash off.
Yes.
I enjoy that way too much.
Me too. Me too.
So yeah, no, like we like met for coffee random Friday. Like one takeaway from that is I remember asking Brian like, so like what is, and at this point I've been volunteering with my church again like every Sunday doing a whole bunch. But I remember asking Brian like, you know, like what does growth and development and like how do you mold leaders?
Yeah.
And one of his not even like leaders necessarily, but like spiritual growth, etc. And one of his comments that just really stuck with me. It was like, it's like really consistently, it's people who are serving and putting themselves out there. Like that's where God can use you and help you grow. So anyway, that definitely stuck out to me. But so that was a random Friday. The following Monday, it was just, there were lots of little things coincidences that lined up there.
Isn't that funny?
Yeah. Sort of annoying sometimes too.
Yeah.
The following Monday, I was like sick and like called off work, and like I don't think in like 6 years I'd been at that job I'd ever called off sick. But I was like, screw it, I'll start like putting in job applications. And literally the very first job application I put in got back to me. Like went through their entire interview process. I think I did like 3 interviews or something with them. And then there was basically like radio silence from them for like 2 weeks or something. They're like, sorry, we ended up like choosing like a different candidate. There was like me and one other guy, and they ended up choosing the other guy. But I don't know. Like I was really encouraged by that. I'm like, okay, there's something here, God, and like kept putting in job applications and like looking for jobs in Pittsburgh so I could move out there. And that was like August. December rolls around, and at that point there was still like nothing. I had actually started like looking for jobs in Indianapolis or something. I was just like, okay, I need to move. I need to do like move on, do something different here. And like again, I made a point of like I'm sending in at least like 1 job application a day. And like I'd gotten a couple of bites, but nothing that was like, okay, this is a good idea. And December, my youth pastor, who I still like volunteer in his youth group with, invited me out to lunch and we were chatting. I was like, so you're still serious about that like Pittsburgh church plant thing? I was like, yeah. And he's like, are you praying about it? I was like, yeah. And he's like, have you asked other people to pray about it? I was like, no. Do you want me to ask other people to pray? I was like, yeah, sure. And then, yeah, like a week later, that first company calls me back and is like, hey, we've got another position. Are you interested in moving to Pittsburgh?
There you go.
And it was just one of those, I'm like, thanks, God.
Yeah.
I'm also slightly annoyed, but thanks.
Yeah.
For making it really clear. And then, yeah, like picked up, moved to Pittsburgh. And yeah, it was definitely one of those. It's interesting because like God clearly showed up in some ways, but it also wasn't, that was sort of like a really obvious loud thing. But in other ways, it wasn't God like really clearly like speaking from the heavens in every single moment or something like that. There was a lot of silence there.
Yeah.
And a lot of me just like taking steps and continuing to move, and then God working through that.
Yeah, I don't think people, when they talk about God moving, like I don't think they highlight that enough, so I'm glad you say that, because the silence can be, what I always tell people is God's like a toddler. When they're quiet, they're up to something, right? So when God's quiet, he's actually working, so be ready,
Yeah.
And a lot of times the silence is hard to manage.
Yeah.
He says one thing and then doesn't say anything for a long period of time.
Mm-hmm. So.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's cool.
But no, yeah, God definitely worked through that. And that just like, and it was also one of those things where once I was willing to move, God could, just to be blunt, God could do so much more. I wasn't stuck in my own old rhythms and habits. And there are so many things I've grown through and learned because of that move that like, yeah, I never would have like seen or known or like, so yeah. God opened a lot.
There's nothing like being a part of a church plant. It's all hands on deck, 24/7 for years.
Yeah, and for me, a big part of that too was the relational growth and emotional growth coming out of that. Of like, I've been a tech guy my entire life. I've literally was like working a soundboard when I was like 7 years old in church, like panning between the split track for like the music, like children's musical thing, so we could have the voices on or off while we were practicing. I remember thinking that was the greatest thing ever. But like, yeah, no, like I've just like always done that.
People gave you opportunities though at a young age too. Then
no, definitely. Oh, 100%.
That's really cool. Yeah.
But
a lot of guys in production, at church production, have stories like that. Nathan, one of my friends from Victory, he was one of my youth students, and he was really quiet. He was hard for me to like really connect to as a young kid because I had a lot to say, and he was really introverted, but like really thoughtful introverted, not a bad thing. And introverted is like I get filled up when I'm alone, not when I'm around people. Introverted that's not a negative connotation. So he was hard for me to like really understand. But man, he gets behind a camera and he gets behind the soundboard, and then he gets behind the lighting board, and he becomes this savant in those areas, and he's still serving there today. Yeah. He started when he was 12 probably. It was unbelievable. Just somebody said, hey, you can press this button. Come on, give it a shot. Yeah. Go ahead, try to make some lighting designs.
Yeah, no, 100%.
That's really cool. Who did that for you?
There specifically like Jeff Ivey is the name that comes to mind. He was the sound guy at my church, was like did professional sound stuff.
That's really cool.
I had no problem with this like 7 or 8 year old just like hanging out there.
Are you still in contact with him by any means?
I actually just added him as a friend on Facebook like a little while ago when he popped into my head. I was like, hey, I should like make sure I like reach out and just let him know about that. Because it was one of those things like, had no problem with a little kid running around just hanging out there in the sound booth with him.
Thanks, Jeff.
No, seriously. And like
for real though.
I remember him giving me like sort of this mini PA set.
He probably has no clue all the things that you've done.
And like sort of just giving me some gear to like get me started and play with stuff. So.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That is so cool.
Yeah.
That is so cool. Oh man. But it wasn't all like, it wasn't all easy for you. You had a lot of, just some rough stuff that you hit in the middle.
Yeah. No, and like, so yeah, say I grew up in church. I think another huge part of my story in that was that like my parents divorced or split when I was like 3 or 4, somewhere in there.
Okay, I didn't realize it was that young.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then my dad died
Jeff
when I was
became
7.
Almost like a father figure in this time, or somebody who's like a cool uncle or something.
I think that's one of the coolest things that God has done in my story is. There are some people who've like grown up without a dad who can say like, hey, I had this one specific father figure. I know for a fact one of my mom's prayers was that like God is a father to the fatherless. I know she prayed that again and again. And in my life, what that actually looked like was a whole bunch of men who stepped up in different ways. And there wasn't like one person who was a father figure, but like Jeff is one guy that comes to mind. There was another guy at the church who our families were close friends. They also had 3 daughters and 1 son. We hung out with them, and I remember just like getting invited to go out to, just like hang out with that family, doing like a bachelor party. Like I got invited to like a pseudo bachelor party thing when their oldest daughter was getting married, the son-in-law who's coming in was a really good friend. So we did like this big paintball get together thing.
Yeah.
And so like just getting pulled in to
It's amazing.
and like getting pulled into other men's lives. There was actually I think the pastor of that church. Again, this would have been when I was a little kid. I remember me hanging out with that family for the afternoon, and then going home with this little toolbox, not little tool, like just one of those little flip open top tool chests of actual like real tools that were just like mine.
Oh, wow.
And so like different
That
things
is
like
really
that
special.
in my life where, and yeah, I guess I'll just say this is like straight up like teaching moment, but like that impacted me so much. And it wasn't even that they were saying, hey, I'm going to take this kid on, I'm going to like make an adoptive son or something like that.
Yeah.
They were just in that moment.
Yes.
Such huge influence.
Being a great
me.
example.
There was my mom's chiropractor took me out hunting a couple of times. Like
Really?
And like I had no real relationship with him or anything like that outside of like, hey, let's like show you what hunting looks like. And
It's funny though because I know you well, and people might not know you, and I also skipped over the hard part of that because I know you. So I want to go back to it. But okay, so you just renovated your house. Somebody gave you tools. It was a man who gave you tools, right? You love the outdoors. A chiropractor, your mom's chiropractor, takes you outdoors. You are now serving in such a huge capacity production-wise. So much so that's like this IT, world and everything, and somebody brought you in there. Caleb, that's like unbelievable, man.
Yeah.
That's really cool.
No, that has been a huge part of my story. And again, it's it's one of those things where it sticks out to me just so much how God has put so many people, men in my life specifically.
Yeah.
Like my dad died when I was 7, but like God has also showed up again and again through all these other people.
So your parents divorced when you were 3 or 4, and he passed whenever you were 7.
Yeah.
Do you remember him being in the home at all?
Some like there was visitation between like my parents, and like I know that was I do distinctly remember some like visitations where like exchanging the kids between the parents and like cops were called and things like that.
Oh wow, okay.
And like so yeah, it definitely was not a.
And I know your mom because she's a saint. So.
And like I honestly don't know all that. Like to be blunt, I sort of know more of my mom's side of it, obviously because I've talked with her about it. But I'll also say like I have no doubt that there were lots of things going on there, and she's told me as much. Like she's like learned and healed a lot since then, and there were a lot of things that were like hard for her in that as well. So
yes, of course.
Like I don't.
She did the best she could, for sure.
And yeah, like raising 4 kids basically by yourself, that's a real hard job.
Yeah. And I found myself, for the sake of the conversation here, it was just so humbling for me to work with your mom on the father code because of all that she endured. And I was a little hesitant, I was like, oh man, I don't know how this is going to go, but she's a perfect person to give insight, a single mom, because like what I don't want to do is speak negatively and say that, the dad is the answer to everything. You know what I mean? Like certainly helps. Yeah. But your mom has done a great job for sure.
Oh, absolutely. And and again, I think I mentioned earlier that like I know beyond a shadow of it, like I've heard her pray it like when I was a little kid, just that like God is a father to the fatherless, and like praying that over her children, and like that's not a small thing. No. And like I've seen God show up again and again. Yeah,
that's amazing. So, that's amazing, man.
Yeah,
yeah. What when your dad passed, you were 7 years old.
Yeah,
like take me to that. Like, did you?
Honestly, that's been another part of my story. Is I remember being told about it. I remember going to the funeral and stuff like that. But I don't know if it in some ways it didn't quite hit me. Like I said, I'd been my dad basically had us every other weekend. We weren't spending a huge amount of time with him. And it was also from leukemia, and so it had been like years of him being in and out of the hospital.
Okay.
And things like that along the line. So like some of it, in a sense, it wasn't too shocking. And it was sort of almost easy for me to move on from because it just sort of like fit in my mold. And again, I was already at that age, I was already the kid who's like spending all night, like staying up all night reading books or like playing on computers or, taking stuff apart and getting into trouble with that. And so like, yeah, for me, it didn't really hit. It didn't. Let me rephrase that. It didn't seem like it hit me really hard.
Yeah. Yeah.
But one of the things I've like processed through in the last couple of years was just like emotionally, I definitely was sort of stunted emotionally because of that. And it's taken me a long time to naturally. And basically, I think I came out of that sort of having this attitude of like all emotions are bad.
Yeah, sure.
And just like, what's the point of emotions? Like, why should I ever even care about them? Like, there's no value in this. My youngest sister and I clashed on this all the time because she was very much on the opposite end of the spectrum. And yeah, I think that was one of the big things that came out of that. And again, I didn't realize this until years later, but I was just sort of like treated all emotions like, yeah, that's worthless. Why would I ever care about that? Like, I'll notice it and be like, okay, goodbye. I don't care about this emotion or anything like that.
Yeah.
And that led to some really unhealthy things in my life. And just growing through and like healing those, like the big one is pornography has been a struggle for me. And like that undoubtedly was a big part of it, was like self-soothing, to like use sort of like a counseling term for that, of like, hey, I don't want to pay attention to these emotions, and here's an easy way to deal with that without having to address anything.
Right.
And yeah, so like that's been just over these last couple of years has been a huge thing of just like learning to engage emotionally and actually deal with emotions and acknowledge them in a healthy way. And yeah, I think that came out of like, it's a very natural thing when I look back on it to come out of like, hey, split parent household where parents were arguing and had some like really nasty, encounters. And then my dad dying and just sort of being like, okay, I'll just like wall all that away. And then, yeah, as I've gotten older, realizing that like, oh no, some of these like coping mechanisms and stuff make it a lot harder for me to have deeper, meaningful relationships.
Right. Right.
Yeah, and then getting to the point where I can say like, no, these relationships and actually diving deeper. And to be clear, like this is both relationship with God and relationship with others that are really impacted by that.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, there's an extreme self-reliance that comes along with everything that you just said. It's like I can only count on myself.
Mm-hmm.
I'm the only one, and that can lead to some unhealthy patterns. And I've noticed, just thanks for sharing that, because a lot of people are afraid to share that, but how many people actually need to hear somebody share about it? It's powerful. I was just with a gentleman the other day. He disciples men, and he said he's a recovering sex addict, but he has been freed from his sexual addiction for 25 years. And I asked him specifically where that came from and how his whole story, he gave me such good wisdom, but he's like, I never learned to confront things. I didn't want to feel. Mm-hmm. So there was a temporary high that came along with all of his behaviors. Now he was obviously much further down the road than what you had described. You know what I mean? I mean, he was all over. He got into some really heavy things. But he said one day he was on the radio and he was kind of hitting rock bottom, and someone on a Christian radio just said something about it and talked about Every Man's Battle. He ends up going to Every Man's Battle, gets into some support groups, and now he's been set free of that for 25 years. He's doing really, really well. Yeah. And he's a guy that I'm really growing to like a whole lot. I've only met him a couple of times. I'm like, man, this guy's full of wisdom, And and he said the thing that hit me, Caleb, going back to you on this, is he said too many pastors say nothing about it. They don't say anything about it, but so many men in the church struggle with these things.
Statistically speaking, it's not that difference inside or outside of the church.
No. I think actually in the church, we're quicker to call it addiction. Yeah. Right? And outside of the church. So that's why they say, more men in the church are addicted to pornography than outside. Because the guys on the outside are like, this is normal behavior. This is what you do. Psychologists say to use it. You know what I mean? Like, oh, come on. But it what you said on that was that it actually hinders you from making significant, deeper connections. Yeah. That's so good.
No, and I have no doubt of that. Like for me, it's absolutely been a part of even just the dating journey of realizing that in high school, at least, I definitely had this opinion, dating in high school is dumb for the most part. Cause I was very much set on hey, I want to date for I want to date for marriage. Yeah. I'm okay, dating in high school, at least everything I was seeing was just dumb. And I will admit, I've sort of softened on that position.
Yeah, sure.
But at the time, especially the approach that most people are taking to it, I'm like, yeah, this is completely and utter waste of time. And like,
And that's a product of your time too.
Yeah.
You know, the purity movement was in full tilt right then. You know?
And like that was a part of it. But looking back on it too, I think an even bigger piece was on some level, I recognized that like I'm not in a place where I can actually have a deep, meaningful relationship. And like, honestly, that was years after high school before I got to the point where I'm like, oh, I need to actually like talk to a counselor about this and like actually process through this. And like, there's a lot more levels to that of actually dealing with that to get to the point where I can actually have a meaningful relationship that's not going to be tied up and messed up with all this other stuff.
Right. Yeah. Right. Yeah. I mean, this sex is a drug, you know. Listen to a psychiatrist called Dr. Daniel Amen. He's a Catholic guy, and you know, but he said sex is a drug. It's releasing dopamine, you know, and pornography it's a dopamine rush. It's that rush that says I don't want to face reality. And I found that a lot of people who struggle with any kind of addiction, they're not doing so because they're just like a bad person. They're doing so because they have pain and they're trying to medicate.
Yep.
That's it.
And in my case, again, I didn't think of it that way. I'm like, no, I can handle my feelings. Like I'm not getting like dragged around here by my feelings.
Right.
And it was really easy to be like, okay, I'll stop doing porn for a little while, but then it would just like come back.
Yeah.
And honestly, it's still something I very much still like struggle with. It's not for me, it's not it's in the rearview mirror. I like never have to struggle with it. But it's also somewhere where like I can turn to God and say like, God, like I can't do this on my own.
Yes.
Because I can look at my history and say like, nope, I've tried. I keep trying things on my own. And the only thing that consistently works is consistent surrender.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
It's that heart that, you know, keeps you going and keeps you moving in the right direction and keeps your heart sensitive, the conscience sensitive as well.
Yeah.
I commend you for that, man.
Yeah.
Because today pornography is chasing men and women down. It's not like when I was a kid and, you know, some kid's dad probably had a magazine hid underneath of, you know, his truck seat, you know. It's everywhere all the time.
Well, and like we'll use terms like gear porn or whatever else, talking about like, oh, isn't this like, and like almost like glorifying it like you were talking about. And
right.
And it's just, and if you're on social media or whatever else, like that's, again, personally something I've had to do is like again, put in rules, put in like, even like my social media usage, like
keep going.
Curtailing that.
Yes.
Actually, strangely enough, one of the things that's made the biggest difference for me, if people are looking for advice or whatever else, is actually ad blockers. Like I basically only, I make a point to try to not use apps where I can't have an ad blocker set up.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Because then I can actually like filter what content is coming to me, and then I'm not getting ads with whatever bombarding me.
Yeah, right.
I'm like, genuinely, that's like for me at least, was a really big deal. And also just like, generally speaking, I hate getting ads everywhere all the time.
Yeah. Yeah.
But that's one of those things I don't, to be clear, there's a huge amount of great advice out there on dealing with this type of stuff, and it's worth diving into. But that's one thing I feel like I haven't heard talked about is just how much advertising can play into, like sending you down the wrong path, getting your mind spinning around on something.
It creates a neurological pathway and it becomes easier and easier to continue to walk down that pathway.
Yeah, and advertisements for me at least have been such a big part of that, and learning to like cut those out wherever possible. It's one of those little things, but is important for me at least.
I can't remember the accountability software I have on every device, but I do. And it's interesting because that's people make fun of me for being a Samsung guy or, you know, a Google guy. Yeah. But, you know, Apple doesn't allow for good accountability software. It just doesn't. So I want that. Yeah. You know, it's.
Yeah. No, for me, being able to tweak stuff. Okay, that's partly I'm just a nerd who loves tweaking anything I get my hands on.
Yeah,
but, like,
for
that's
sure.
Another part of that value is if I can like block ads and stuff like that, then like it helps.
Right. Yeah. Well, I commend you for that, man.
So.
And okay, so if you're giving advice to somebody who's really struggling and soothing themselves in the same areas, and it doesn't even have to be through pornography. It could be through shopping. It could be through binge eating. It could be through what's your advice?
For me personally, it was very much recognizing emotions, recognizing not all emotions are bad, and learning to try to put names to things. I remember thinking it was so stupid when the counselor I was working with pulled out this thing that's called like an emotion wheel. You can look it up, like an image of it.
Yeah.
And like breaks down to like large categories of emotions and like different variations of it. And just being like, wow, this is stupid. Why are we wasting time on this? And yeah. I don't think it's stupid anymore.
No, yeah.
And like learning. So for me, I think that's been one of the biggest like takeaways that, or like things I didn't realize or maybe didn't hear talked about as much, was just like being willing to accept and identify emotions and say they're not bad.
Yeah.
Has been one of the biggest things. And then like taking that and then also taking it to Jesus.
Yeah.
Combined with so for me, I started off this conversation with pride, sort of linking back to that goes hand in hand with all that. That's one of the reasons why I'm not going to say I have no hesitation talking about this subject, but it's one of the reasons why I'm very willing to talk about it. Because I know pride was a piece that like hung me up. It's like, hey, no, I'm like church volunteer. Like I help lead a small group or whatever else. Like I have to be perfect or whatever else.
Yeah.
And like pride is definitely a piece of that. And so, and again, one more of those emotions and like learning to recognize that. And so, yeah, all those things have sort of come together of just recognizing and being willing to be upfront that like, hey, there's stuff that I can't handle on my own and I have to take it to Jesus at the end. Sort of that, where is it? Like Paul says basically, like, I'm the greatest of sinners, and having that attitude of like, yeah, I'm a sinner. I'm saved by grace and been sanctified and purified. But I also can't do this on my own because it's by God's grace.
Right.
And again, having that humility to say, no, I can't do this on my own.
Yes.
And every day I have to take up my cross and follow Jesus.
Yes. Yes. We do. Yeah.
So that was long
That's
and rambly,
good.
but
No, it's good. And specifically, I'm thinking about a couple of really good counselors. I think it's a really good. I refer a lot of women to Tanisha Townsell. She was on this with Eden. She's unbelievable. Just a very motherly but direct. And sometimes you just need that, you know. Cognitive Behavioral Institute in Cranberry, Dr. Jonathan Impellizzeri, he taught the master's program at Geneva College. And there's a lot of faith-based counselors there, but they're also trained very well
and I think
secularly.
That's an important thing, is getting both of those pieces to come together.
Yeah, because people are like, oh, psychology is bad in the grand scheme of like the church world. When it was introduced, it's bad, and yes, it's been used for bad purposes. Like we've seen how, it has been, but it's not all bad. I mean, there are such biblical principles that a good counselor who is even, I've done a lot of research recently on internal family systems. And I have a family member who went through some trauma and went through that. And they asked me, hey, can you make sure that this is like theologically sound? I read it. I read two books by the gentleman who invented this way of thinking. And I was blown away by it. And I was blown away that it wasn't a Christian book.
Yeah.
There's like, what?
So much of psychology.
Funny though, this person's counselor has had meetings with him and his heart has been opened up because he sees things from the outside perspective in the world and it's pointing straight to God. Yeah. And it's unbelievable. It's so cool. So And if a Christian would have came up with this, it would be the best-selling Christian book of all time. But then since it's a non-Christian, it's like, oh, we can't trust it. It's really good stuff. Yeah. Really good stuff. Nothing's all good. So thanks for that, man. This is good. This is good. And so how did that resolve? You went through counseling and I know it's not resolved. You said you're still working it out, but how did you get to a place of strength where you feel like I have the tools to work through this and continue to work through this?
I genuinely, I don't know if I have an answer to that question. I think that is that's very much where I'm at. I was just saying no, I have to go to God with this daily. And I guess for me, resolution, if you will, is more of, or a key piece of that for me is not saying what am I running away from, what am I avoiding, but rather what am I running to? Mm-hmm. And I'm running to God's arms and God's embrace and being wholly known and loved by Him. And then also being honest about all those other motivations too. Like a not small motivation for me is, hey, I want a wife one day. And like,
Yeah.
I know I am not going to,
Yeah.
like, I would not allow myself to marry a woman if like that's where I was stuck in. Like
Yes.
I would just be like, no, this is not going to end well. Like I can't go into a marriage relationship that
It's still so much. You're right.
without putting you first. So
yeah.
like
Yeah.
that's sort of where I'm at, I guess, is saying like, hey, where do I want to go? What am I focusing on? And how do I put God and, again, taking up my cross daily and following him and saying like, hey, this is something I struggle with and I just have to lay it down at your feet.
Yeah.
And not try and carry it myself and not try and do it all under my own power. Because that's, going back to the pride thing, it's so easy for me to be like, oh, I can just like do this. I can follow these rules. I can do whatever else. Instead of saying, no, I'm going to accept God's forgiveness, accept I'm going to mess this up, accept I'm not going to be perfect with it, but I'm going to keep chasing after God and putting God first. And saying like, what's this bigger picture, God, that you want to lead me to? And let me accept your forgiveness, even if I am screwing up, even if I am like going back to bad habits. God, I want to put you first. And like, I guess one more lesson is like not.
It's great stuff.
Not letting shame win, not letting shame say like, oh, you like screwed up, you went back to porn, like now you can't spend time with God. Guess what? God still wants to spend time with you.
Yes.
And like last time I checked, like running away from God, not spending time with him is not a good way to get back on track. Mm-hmm. And like the only way to get back on track is the humility of saying like, hey, I screwed up, God, and I'm taking this to you. And like,
it's really good.
I need your help.
Yeah. Yeah, I need your help. I interrupted you, but I'm saying, all I was saying is that's really good.
So
that's really good. You know, I just want to commend you because a lot of people will do the work on the outside. You know, I can get this covenant eyes or filter and, you know, all this and I'll be good. But doing the internal work produces outward change. And that's where we all should be.
Yeah. And
we're all a work in progress.
I was gonna say it's a work in progress and it's slow sometimes. And I don't feel like I've always got it all figured out. And like, I definitely still feel like I struggle. And like, and to be clear, all these other things that you're talking about, like are so important. Having accountability partners, having the software, having the tracking, whatever else.
But if the inward doesn't change. Yeah, if the inward, the heart doesn't change, like
what do I actually want, God? Like, where are you trying to lead me? Where do I want to be? Who's the man I want to be?
Yeah. Yeah. And what does this open up my life to that I'm unaware of? Yeah. You know, what would my wife say about this? Yeah. What would my daughter say about this? And you know, there's an argument in Christian circles if these things are even bad or not. Yeah. And I simply asked one of my friends in an argument, would you tell your grandfather you're doing this? He's like, well, no. You know?
Well, and I also want to say, I almost think it's a mistake. And this is something I go back and forth on to focus, for me at least, too much on like, hey, I want a future wife. How about just like right here in the now? How does this affect my relationship with my friends? Like, I know for a fact.
Yeah, that's really good. Yeah.
That like right now, it will affect my relationships. It makes me not want to go as deep with people when I'm like stuck in porn or whatever else. It makes relationships harder. It doesn't let me go to that deeper level. It makes me feel like I don't need that deeper level. And like, we should. Yeah, like marriage, again, that's future marriage or whatever else aside. Like, the church should be a community where people feel like known and loved. Yes. And if you're like self-soothing and saying like, I don't need people because I can do this on my own. Because like, I want to be at a point where I'm a whole person without a wife to complete me or something like that. Yeah. That's like a danger. That's believing not who I want to get, where I want to be with this is like, no, God, I want to be able to stand with your help, surrounded by my Christian brothers and sisters, like as a wholly known and loved person who's like in deep relationships. And like porn
the struggle does not stop just because you get married. Yeah. Yes. And porn absolutely gets, keep going.
And like porn absolutely gets in the way of all those relationships. Yes. And again, it's not just a like marriage thing or whatever else. Yeah. At least in my mind, it affects all of those relationships. And I think that's been a huge thing, is recognizing that for me.
So true. That's so true. Yeah. So. Well, way to do the inward work. Thanks for sharing. Any last bits of wisdom there, if you could?
I don't know if I would. I guess sort of just wrap it all up is just what I was saying of like, So the book, you recommended this like years ago, but Emotionally Healthy Spirituality.
Yeah. Pete Scazzaro.
Pete Scazzaro. He has a prayer in there. I think he calls it the Jesus prayer.
Okay.
But it's just this really simple mantra of, Lord Jesus Christ, Son of God, have mercy on me, a sinner.
Yeah.
I don't know. And like, that's sort of where I want to live. Is like, what do I want to be known for? I want to be known as like, being a son of God, being loved and fully known by him.
Yeah.
And not focusing as much on like, hey, I don't want to do porn or whatever else. No, I want to be chasing after God fully. And what does that look like? And what does it look like to have a life that can have deep, meaningful relationships that leave permanent impact on other people?
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's not going to happen when I'm stuck, in my room doing things by myself and not having those deep, meaningful relationships with other people.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. That's really good. What's in the darkness grows in faith. What's in the light dies. The light heals. It reveals in order to heal, right? So all that negative, if you just keep it in the dark and hide it, it's just going to continue to fester and grow. Yeah. And I commend you for surrounding yourself with the right people, resourcing yourself well, and chasing after God's heart for all of that. But man, thank you so much for all you do. From a production standpoint, yes, from like everything, but like you're really fun to be around. And, I just really enjoy time with you.
No, I appreciate
and
that.
This is all an excuse to spend time together. So
fair enough.
You do a great job, man.
Yeah, I really appreciate it.
Yeah, we all appreciate you so much, too.
Thanks.
So good job today. Thank you.
I appreciate it.
I know you guys like this, right? So Caleb, you're awesome, man. Thank you so much. See you guys soon.